Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Been getting a lot of emails, and rather than me answer something, it's so nice that I actually stole Asir's phone for a couple seconds, and I said, "Look, before you run back out, let me just get you on camera for a couple seconds and answer something that I'm sure a lot of people want to know about." So, what's going on? What is the EU? If I could just, keep it simple, what's the EU, and why are so many people kind of freaked out that Britain pulled away?
The EU itself technically is what they refer to as a supra state. It was the modern brainchild of a dude named of the ex old French president named Jean Monnet, I believe his name was, or Jacques Monnet, something like that. And what he did was he proposed that France and all of the European nations should eventually create something that's similar to the United States. And so the way that the United States came into power, or came into being, in which that it took the American nationality and incorporated it, and then converted that to United States to make it a blanket nationality for anybody, when at one time it was specifically for one group of people. That was the copper-colored, olive-skinned, dark-skinned, aboriginal people of North Central South America, of which we know we call them Moors. So, long story short, in Europe, first, EU means hillside and rope means to bind in. So in Europe, everybody was in their own individual countries for so long that they wanted to consolidate the European and create a supra state, which would be not a super state, but a supra state, a state that would eventually basically break all of Europe down into regions instead of countries. So this way, it would basically be European would now become a blanket term for anybody who exists in Europe. So there would be no more Bulgarians, there would be no more, that would just be like the little hamlet of land that used to be its own state, but is now just like a little fiefdom within the grand super state of Europe. So the irony is that in order to do something like this, it has to take place over a certain period of time. So they did things across the years, like the Treaty of Rome, the Treaty of Nice, the Maastricht Treaty, the Treaty of Amsterdam, the Treaty of this, the Treaty of that, and every treaty was moving them closer to this. But what they would do is they wanted to keep the main goal of it away from what the people knew it to be. So by the time all of this conspiracy stuff started in the United States, where people began to
You felt like something dropped, right?
something dropped, right?
It's okay. Nothing did. Nothing fell out the car either. Good.
Dropping it. That's going to be dropping it. Anyway, so it got to a point where so many different individual European states now, after World War II, after World War I, the Crimean War, World War II, now we're moving into World War III, IV, and V, it got to a point where the European people feel like they're now on the outnumber. So what they have to do is consolidate themselves. This is not everybody in Europe. The individual countries in Europe want to have their own sovereignty to a degree, but they don't really understand the mechanics at play. The mechanics at play is that the people that are in the European Union at the top were never really voted in the first place. They were never really elected in the first place. They had treaty meetings for this with 25 countries. Originally it started with 6, then it went to 25, then it went to 50. Now I think it's like 60, 70 countries. They met in Brussels for 25 months straight in secret. These are the presidents of these countries, these are the prime ministers and all of that. They didn't tell their people they're going there, they just going to Brussels to do that. So Britain, which was one of the consignatories on it through the dread vulgar Queen Elizabeth and their little thing, they paid money into underwriting. So really they started to basically bet against their own people and basically agree that if they created a super state, then that means they would still be the elite in it, but now they have a bigger army. Because now everybody's individual state comprises the European army now. So now we'll have a European army, we'll have a European space program, we'll have a European constitution. So that's where they at now. So about 2-3 years ago, if anybody remember, Greece went crazy because it went bankrupt. Germany, under Merkel, Prime Minister Merkel, who they say is Hitler's daughter, agreed to bail them out if the United States, if they lapsed on the loan later, if the United States would come and bail Germany out for that. So this was all a part and put into play based on what Bush did under his regime, where he signed he signed a trade agreement that basically opened it up, a free trade agreement with the EU at Brussels. But he never finished up on it. Then when Clinton came in, Clinton then signed GAFTA and NAT. GATT and NAFTA,
Can you
which
explain?
became the two free trade agreements that opened up and broke away and took away from the tariff ability for the United States as a corporation to function and do goods and stuff. So a little over 2 months ago, the United States Incorporated, that was incorporated in Puerto Rico in 1871, just formally has been voided. So what has happened now is that all of the Republican powers in the American Republic, the nationals, right, that is now vested in the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff right now. Whereas this pageantry that we see as a fake election and a president and all of that is nobody's paying attention to that. Because what's happening is that the BRICS Union done stepped in and said that they don't want nobody dealing with anything that's not self-government. So the world is moving towards self-individual government with a collective purpose based on the indigenous rights of Earth. And the first people in that plan is us. However, we can't take part of that plan if we're citizens of the United States, because, if we're United States citizens, because that would then mean that we are the collateral asset of the now defunct United States Corporation that went bankrupt in 1871. So Britain now, because Britain back in the days prior to the ascendancy of the United States used its pound sterling as the world reserve currency, they depreciated their market and went into a perpetual inflation, which then the private bankers of the crown came in and helped set up the MIF and all of that to get them out. And then now that is the cause now that the world is moving toward. So the IRS and all of these different companies are now functioning through treasury dollars. So American nationals, meaning citizens of the United States, a citizen of the United States is an American national. An American national is someone who's declared that they're independent of Europe. Therefore, they fall under the unalienable rights of the posterity. And we happen to be of Al-Moroccan descent, so that means that we're at the top of the line because we have the first treaty with one of the proprietors in this whole problem. So Britain, I guess they done came out and realized that...
I'm moving because it's hot on my calves.
Right?
Hey.
Britain probably flipped it,
move.
where they became a situation where they realize now that there's no way out for them. Because as they're not telling you that Gaddafi was used to stem the tide of refugees into Europe. Now that they killed him, you got to understand all of these refugees coming into Europe have been fundamentally militarized by members of CIA, Mossad, ISS, and all of that conglomerated in this new ISIS thing, which is really just the Muslim Brotherhood under a whole nother name, backed up by intelligence forces. So what this has done now is forced Islamic tide into Europe that now wants them to circle the wagons to keep these people out. So what basically is happening is they're putting themselves in a position to kind of be the only country in the EU that's outside the EU, which then is a problem. So what that's going to do is that's going to force countries like Scotland, countries like Greece, countries like Spain, what they're going to do is they're going to try to break away too. But they can't do that because the machine is already moving. So the mobilization of the EU in terms of the money, now, this is where it comes into the US. Because what they don't tell you is that the US, what they don't tell you is that the US is a part of the EU based upon them not paying that money back to Germany for bailing out Greece. So that means now that the head of the US, which is also NATO, come on, we gotta go back to the grid, which is also NATO. So now you have EU.
No, I was just telling you to move because of the light.
The light, right?
Yeah, you can stand right here. I don't need to walk back that way.
Okay. So
I have a couple more minutes.
So you have the United States that represents NATO, right?
He's trying to figure out why I'm moving. You were moving, so I'm moving with you guys.
Right. So you know the US represent NATO, and then the EU represents all of Europe now. So now when they meet at the Trans-Pacific, they now have to come together through what's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That says that any English-speaking countries that get together have to have a certain bond of friendship and mutual understanding. So now that this is NATO now, dealing under that. But guess what? Once they do that, that now puts them in the sphere of the Asian Union, which now consolidates now the coming together of what people have been talking about every year since we've become consciousness in terms of the New World Order. You got the NATO, you got the EU, You got the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you got GATT, you got NAFTA, you got the Treaty of Rome, you got the Treaty of Nice, which then links all of these up because the Asian Union is underwriting that, which gives China prima facie now to come in and lock it down. So God forbid a war breaks out in Europe, what's going to happen is they're going to take all the U.S. forces over there to fight that, and all the Chinese forces are going to come here. And they're going to lock down anybody that's not an American national, that can prove that they have a nationality and have declared their nationality outside of the United States based upon the Treaty of Paris, the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Ghent, based on what people like Sakurno do. Look all of this stuff up, because I'm not always into busting all of them. All of this stuff is relevant information because it's all been public for the past 50, 80 years since they've been doing all of this. So what we're seeing now is the first blast or gunshot in the whole global big deck global reset, where they're starting to do the redistribution of wealth, in which now we go from Federal Reserve notes to United States notes, which are backed by gold and silver, underwritten by the government or whoever of the Philippines and China. That's why recently Indonesia just sank a Chinese fishing boat in their territorial waters, because the relationship with China and Indonesia is also kind of fragmented based upon them having disputes over these island chains, as well as that with Japan. So the overall end game is that the United States is going to be demoted to a third world country, and everybody that's United States citizens are going to be listed as assets or comply or consignatories to the effect. So they become a part of the receivership. So the only way out is to establish the international identity based on the treaties that exist that are there to protect all human beings, right? But specifically us as Moors or Moorish Americans or Asiatics or whatever you want to say. You gotta understand, they secretly took off Negro off of the birth certificates. They've secretly done away with the term Oriental. They are putting,
right here, so
they're putting African American now in term of
go.
Negro, but the term African American is not cemented to any landmass. So that means then that you technically, by taking that designation, fall into a stateless being. And as a stateless being, you can be corralled into asset, so that way they can adjudicate and use your bond or your birth certificate or whatever they have to pay off the debt that they can never pay back. So now you have
So that's
people,
why Britain pulled away.
That's why Britain pulled away, because they don't want to find themselves in the position that the United States is in. So where Britain and Europe is in the same place that the United States was in 1492. They're about to go over there because, remember, the birth rate of a lot of the Caucasian people, typically Caucasian people in Europe, is basically zero.
I sometimes feel like you're rushing. It's okay.
It's basically like zero. It's like 1 or maybe 2%, 1.2%. So you have to understand this mass influx of refugees now that have all been highly politicized in fundamental Islam, right? Who have become zealot so-called Muslims are now the ones that are going to wage war on those people that's there. But guess what? MI5 and them then let that happen. So now that Britain is pulling away, it's going to be one of the only states in Europe, let's say, that's not around that. So how are they going to get past that? What they're going to do, they're going to have another fake election. And that election, they're going to say, oh, well, the people have voted to go back into the Union. But guess what? You can't do that because you can't do, it's not a video game. You can't do a do-over. You know what I'm saying? Most recalled elections never really stand because they're so contested in court that they can never do it. So they have to wait till next year to do a whole nother election. So between now and then, Britain now is going to be ostracized because now the stock market in which the euro is invested, they get a lot of money. They get over, each European country got to pay the EU at least $2 billion a year. You understand? So you break that down weekly or daily, how much they paying out to the EU. So now that the Britain don't got to pay that, they can keep that money. You know the white man don't deal with that. The white man want his money when he want it. So now that Britain is ostracized, that now means that the royal family, the puppet royal family, the demons, they now have to still be in the EU. So to get the backing, what they got to get the United States military force to come in, you see what I'm saying, to hold that down. But what destroyed Rome? Rome got destroyed when it stretched itself too far and neglected its infrastructure. So that's what's happening in the whole thing now. So this is now a worldwide collapse.